All right, and looks like we are good. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for the fifth day of Blackbirders Week 2023. My name is Ade Ben Salahuddin. I'm one of this year's co-chairs for the events. And again, we appreciate everyone's tuning in over the past few days, sharing your stories, sharing your insights, and just sharing your joy about, all things birds and nature and, being your loud and proud Black selves in whatever way that manifests. So today, for our theme of Free as a Bird, we are going to be delving into issues regarding environmental justice and just generally how birds and nature inspire us to be advocates for social change and specifically Black liberation and Black freedom causes, because the links between conservation and racial justice are very, very closely tied and something that needs to be um, highlighted and really emphasized in just in general, but in particular in these turbulent times that this current moment that we're really in right now. So, without further ado, before the event begins, I would like to thank the sponsors for this event, Wild Birds Unlimited Incorporated. I believe they are doing a giveaway as well related to that. Um, but more generally, just we appreciate them for financially sponsoring a lot of what's been going on and for being a partner this year, in addition to our various other partners, including the Smithsonian and other platforms like the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and multiple others that we will be sure to be thanking in the full credits at the end of the week. So today's talk is specifically about the environmental justice and conservation links. And I've got two esteemed individuals here that I would love to introduce and hear from, and would like for you all to hear from. So, as we know, birds are symbols of freedom in Black cultures for generations. And the question is sort of, how do you make that connection between what benefits them benefits us? People don't necessarily think that they are that closely linked, but these two individuals are just a few of the many who are trying to shed light on that topic. So let me first introduce Jhoni Ada. She is a community outreach coordinator for the Sierra Club Connecticut chapter. So she's kind of local to me. She's passionate about the intersectionality of green communities, sustainability, business, and technology, particularly in the age of climate change. She's done amazing community organizing work in the South Bronx and approaches her ecological justice work in Bridgeport, Connecticut with rigor as she works to save the 422-acre forest, Remington Woods, which she will definitely be telling you about more soon. When she isn't daydreaming of innovative ways to empower communities, she's binge watching Netflix series, trying new recipes, visiting new trails, and of course, farming. The other esteemed guest with me this morning is Derrick Z. Jackson. Derrick is an award-winning news, sports, environmental, and social justice journalist, author, and photographer. He has more than 45 years of experience with the Boston Globe, Newsday, and as an independent writer, has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Headliners Awards. He's an 11-time winner for the National Association of Black Journalists, a 4-time winner for the National Society of Newspaper Columnists, a 2-time commentary winner for the National Education Writers Association, a 2-time winner for the American Society of Journalists and Authors, and and a commentary winner for the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, which is fitting. Happy Pride Month to those in that community, especially those Black individuals in that community. Derrick has also spent 2 years working with and covering the story of Project Puffin, which I have some personal ties with if you've seen our YouTube channel, co-authoring 2 books, Project Puffin, The Improbable Quest to Bring a Beloved Seabird Back to Egg Rock, and The Puffin Plan, Restoring Seabirds to Egg Rock and Beyond, both of which were co-authored with the Conservation Initiative's founder, Stephen Kress. So, welcome to you both, and thank you for joining on this morning. I would like to start with a quick question that I think will be answered by both of your presentations that you have prepared for us. But if you'd like to just speak a little bit off the cuff before we go into that, how did your relationship with birds and nature begin? And if you consider yourself a birder, what was your spark bird? Whoever would like to take the floor first.
Jhoni, you want to go first?
Sure, I could definitely go first. Thank you for having me on here. I'm really excited to share and also to hear. So my experience with birding actually began in books. I was an avid reader growing up. I remember reading My Side of the Mountain and just being like super in love with falcons and hawks. However, truthfully, at that age, I don't think that thinking of myself as a birder or even having the courage to pursue a career in nature was something that I thought of as achievable. Um, just because of circumstance, access, right? Um, it was as unattainable as being an artist or a creative. So this journey into nature, or even being able to experience birding, is really a leap of defiant faith for me. I would say that my spark bird was definitely the blue-footed booby. Growing up, I was absolutely enamored by their blue feet, just their unique nesting techniques, and also just like how fabulous the males were, just to attract their female counterparts. Um, but if I'm going to be completely honest, I really appreciated birds that were far away from what I knew as home, which was a more urban setting. And so I think I identify more as a novice, toe deep birder. And I would say that my spark bird recently has been the blue jay, not just because they're absolute jerks, but um, because they're just they're actually literally amazing. They're incredibly intelligent. Um, they're con artists. They're frugal. They're oak tree farmers. And I just really appreciate their dynamic nature, is what I'll say.
And yeah, I was a typical urban boy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so I had zero appreciation for birds. I thought the
Mm.
Eagles played football in Philadelphia, the Cardinals played baseball in St. Louis. Um, and it wasn't until I met my wife, my wife, who's a Girl Scout and a nature lover. He got me into nature. Um, and my first bird I really paid attention to was on our first anniversary trip to Nova Scotia. And we were in a national park, and I saw a great blue heron.
Mm.
And I knew so little about birds at the time that this would have been 1981. I knew so little about birds that I thought that this was some rare, endangered, like amazingly, bird that I don't know if I'll ever see it again.
Mm.
And then of course I return home to Massachusetts, go to my local wildlife sanctuary, and there's tons of great blue herons there. So it's just also proof of how you may have seen something for your whole life and never paid
Mm.
any attention to it. And
Right.
so my spark bird is the great blue heron.
Those are both very, very good birds. And I'm noticing blue is a theme here. So, but maybe there's something to that. So my next series of questions are basically based off of, the work that you do. So I will leave you all to explain, what your projects are in the little presentations you prepared for us. If Jhoni would like to go first.
Yeah, I just need a second to connect my presentation. Um, so I'm really excited to share with you guys some of these photos. Um, I have the honor and the privilege of working with the Sierra Club to preserve a 422-acre forest in Bridgeport, Connecticut. But first, I definitely do want to just preface that The work that I am doing is on the land of the Niantic, the Golden Hill, the Turkey Hill Pagasa tribes, the Pequot, the Quinnipiac, the people of the Longhouse, and the Shattuck. And then also, I stand on the shoulders of just great environmental justice forerunners that really paved the way for me to be able to do the things that I'm doing today. But yeah, Remington Woods is a 422-acre forest in an urban city. And unfortunately, it is currently in danger uh, of the threat of development. It was previously owned by an organization called Remington Arms, and for years they polluted the land with munitions. But since their ownership, this land has literally just been healing. It's been trying to figure it out. It's currently in remediation by its current owners. And I think one of the most amazing things is that this land has been providing clean air, shelter for so many different species, as well as the human species that lives in this community. So my work is really focused on actualizing the preservation of this site. It has more than 68 different bird species that consider this place home, a resting place. And so for obvious reasons, right, it's so important to save it. I've realized though that in this space, it's very common for folks to get excited about wildlife whenever I talk about conservation, and understandably, right? Understandably, I also find that conservation is just as important for wildlife as it is for the people, especially for marginalized communities who historically have not had access to forests, to green space, and also to exploration and just seeing different animals. And in part, sometimes when I do reflect on the work that I do, not only is it access that has been denied to folks because of the politics or the lay of the land, or just racism, because that's what it is, environmental racism. But also there's this sense of just not being able to see their identity as being attached and a part to nature, of being a part of nature. And so it just makes things like enjoyment and exploration seem impossible. Fun fact, I actually grew up around Remington Woods. It was a part of my bus route for more than 4 years, and I never realized what the space was. I had no idea that there was this huge forest that was the resting ground of so many different amazing wildlife. And it wasn't until this position opened up that I realized that this place was actually in danger. And so the conservation of this specific biome is really a legacy vision casting for me. I would love to see this preserved, not just as a home for all of the amazing birds, all the amazing tree species that are here, but also as a green space that really fosters exploration and wonder for Black and Brown people. And that's the work that I'm working on.
Thank you for that. It looks beautiful. I've never actually seen photos of it.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not the sort of thing I would expect in, say, an area like Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yeah.
All right. Derek, would you like to... Actually, I can share yours. So give me 1 second. Yes, and anybody who is in the chat, please feel free to comment, ask any questions, because there will be a Q&A section shortly thereafter. It is indeed tomorrow, yes. Okay, so we are looking for... Okay, here we go.
Great. Thank you, Ade. You're going to get the lightning round version of my what I call environmental justice for puffins. It's been you can go to the first puffin picture, and slowly scroll by them. It's been my great privilege to help tell the story of the restoration of puffins to the coast of Maine. The restoration of puffins, this is the 50th anniversary of what is called Project Puffin, which is the world's first successful restoration of a seabird to an island where humans killed it off. Puffins were almost completely eliminated from the state of Maine in the 1880s, and by hunting. Hunter coastal fishermen and dwellers looking for meat and eggs. And starting in 1973, Steve Kress, a young Audubon bird instructor on Hog Island at one of the Audubon Society's camps, learned that puffins had once existed in the 19th century on these islands and vowed to bring them back. At that moment, there were only a handful of puffins on one island way up in Maine, but puffins had existed on many islands throughout the state off the coast. So you can scroll to the next one. So this, by the way, this picture that you're looking at is the one you're looking at. This is a puffin with a beak full of hake, and I'll get back to why that's important in a second. Puffins are now down. They were down to 2 birds, or maybe 4, in the entire state in 1902. And with the efforts of Project Puffin, today there are now more than 1,300 pairs of puffins on several islands throughout off the coast of Maine. And so this one is, I took this last year. Puffins now, the good news is that they've been restored. The challenging news is that they have now been restored just in time to be a true canary of climate change because of the Gulf of Maine, of which the puffins are in. The Gulf of Maine, which is a massive body of water that starts off of the north coast of Cape Cod and goes all the way up to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. It is the fastest warming body of ocean on Earth. Its temperature has been rising at a rate that I'll put it like this, and this is with the blessing of scientists. This analogy, the temperature of the Gulf of Maine has risen about 4 degrees over its historic levels. For us as humans, 4 degrees is relatively nothing. For the fish that seabirds catch, 4-degree difference is like boarding a plane in Boston or New York in the dead of winter in January, flying to Miami Beach, getting off the plane, but you can't take your parka off. So the fish in over the last decade have been the most volatile conditions for seabirds, where some years the fish are great, and other years, particularly 2 years ago, the fish almost completely the fish that seabirds need to feed their chicks almost completely disappears. And so you can scroll down another couple of puffin pictures. This one, the puffin you're just seeing was carrying sorry. This one is carrying haddock. And in good years, this is what you want to see puffins bring in. When the water's too warm, though, these fish disappear. You can go to the next one. And this is when I started visiting these islands in 1986. There were about this many puffins completely on the island of Eastern Egg Rock in Maine, as there are in this picture now. Eastern Egg Rock now has about 180 pairs of puffins. So now the puffins are great, and I've also had the opportunity to cover many aspects of the environment for the Boston Globe, for the Union of Concerned Scientists, GRIST, and so if you can go to the next slide. I've been able to we'll get back to that. We'll flip it. Why don't you go down to the offshore wind?
Offshore wind.
Yeah.
This one here?
I've had the, and you can slowly scroll down till you get to the end of the offshore wind pictures. I've had the opportunity to travel to Europe several times to cover the offshore wind industry in the hopes that we finally start that industry here in the United States. As you can see, it's quite, the parts are quite massive. And in Europe, it's created tens of thousands of jobs through and also beginning to get nations, and you just hold it right there. And no, yeah, you can go to go to the next one. And it's been able to have some countries such as Denmark on a trajectory to fossil-free nation by 2050. And other nations are over in Europe are well on their way to, say, 50% renewable energy. Also, I've had the opportunity to cover communities, Black communities and brown communities throughout the United States that are taking advantage of programs to get solar power on their homes. This is Southeast Washington, D.C. And this is Ms. Felder, who is the neighborhood leader to get solar on the majority of houses in her development. You move on, Ade. The next slide. This is a woman in San Diego, Black woman getting her solar power from a crew that was almost completely Latino. Next slide. And this is a family in San Diego. The fellow on the far right with the suit and the golden shirt, Mr. Robinson. He was the neighborhood organizer in his community that got the majority of the homes in his neighborhood with solar power. This neighborhood is a mixed neighborhood with significant numbers of Black families in it. Next slide. And most importantly, the renewable energy could be a major source of jobs in the Black community. This is a solar installation for the Black woman in the middle by a Black-owned solar installation company in Washington, D.C. Next slide. And I've also covered, that's the good stuff that should be happening. And this is why it should be happening. This is Crystal Martinez, a mother of 2 kids in Southeast Chicago. And that red building behind her is owned by a national firm, a materials handling firm. That plant was found by the EPA to be emitting dangerous levels of manganese dust, a neurotoxin that, like lead, can cause irreversible brain damage if gets into your body at too high of a level. And next slide. That's her walking up the street with the kids. And this is, I'm showing you these because this is the proximity that Black and brown people disproportionately live next to throughout the United States. I'm sure many of you on this call probably know that. And I just want to emphasize that this is not just an issue of income because of redlining and racist practices. Black and brown people, Black people in particular, historically, are much more likely to live with toxic pollution regardless of their income level. Next slide. And this is not too far away. This is East Chicago, Illinois. Give you an idea of the proximity that people live next to the infrastructure of fossil fuels and other polluting industries. Next. Similar neighborhood, same neighborhood. Next. And this is a park in East Chicago, right across the street from an oil refinery.
Hmm.
Right. So what I've come to really try to get across in recent years, and is that to me the same things that would benefit puffins in terms of climate change are exactly the same things that would benefit Black and Brown communities in daily living in the cities, hundreds and even thousands of miles away from my beloved puffins. Because reducing climate change to cool the waters in the Gulf of Maine so that the puffins can find their fish is exactly the same actions we need to take to reduce particulate pollution in the cities, to reduce the fossil fuel exhaust from highways, and all the things that give our kids asthma, heart disease, and a whole host of other maladies. In fact, one thing that is really not very well known is that African Americans and Latinos actually in basically every national survey show a more concern for climate change than actually white Americans. Um, and that's because we live it every day in a way that many white families are able to insulate themselves from through privileges of living where they can live, living next to forests, next to greenery, next to more open space, et cetera, et cetera. So I will just stop right then there. There's, depending on questions, there are other slides I can show in the interest of time and fairness. We'll stop right there.
All right. Thank you for all of that. While we wait for Jhoni to come back on, she's lost a bit of connection, but she'll be back momentarily. There is a question for you, Derrick. Let's see.
I see.
Yes. So, I'm sorry. Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah, I see one camera I use is
Yes.
a Nikon D810. And the close-ups of puffins are with a 300 with a 2-time extender to make it like a 600, a cheap person's 600 millimeter, because I can't afford the $10,000 600 prime lens. So and of course, and the Nikon what's interesting is the cameras I'm using are already been outmoded by technology. All my buddies now are moving to mirrorless cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So I shouldn't tell my wife this, but I may want to be stepping up my game a little bit.
The trade secrets are coming out. But yeah, that's really fascinating. The fact that, I mean, even in the chat I'm looking at now, like people aren't realizing or didn't know that there are puffins like in the continental United States.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. If you're ever in the state of Maine, it's now pretty easy to see them in the middle of this summer. It's a very short period in which you can actually see them. Puffins actually only come to shore for about 4 months to breed and have their chicks, and then they go out in the open ocean for 8 months. The Maine's puffins, they've been using GPS to figure out what their migration patterns are, and they tend to go up into the mouth of the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the early winter, and then they triangulate down to about 100 miles southeast of Cape Cod, ironically in a positive way, in the very area that President Obama designated as the Atlantic Ocean's first marine sanctuary, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, an area rich with underwater mountains that kind of funnels water and nutrients and attracts whales, birds, all kinds of life, and has corals as colorful as anything you'd see on a coral reef in the Florida Keys, with the only difference that many of those corals are like 5,000 feet deep.
Right. Wow, I didn't. That's new information to me as well. Like even the fact that they travel that far south, because I remember doing research for my own video series on Project Puffin, documenting my experiences there last year. Even though I wasn't on an island that had puffins, I was on Eastern Egg, not Eastern Egg. I'm sorry, OGI, Outer Green Island, and to my recollection, that's a little bit further south along the Maine's coastline than the puffins tend to nest. So when I actually saw a puffin offshore, just swimming around one day while I was doing some observation stints, and I flagged it on eBird, or I noted on eBird, and eBird said it was a rare find, and I had to justify it by taking a picture and sending it to them and saying, "No, I really saw this thing. This is the bird I came out here to see."
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's. I hope Jhoni gets back on. She's having trouble getting in. I'll just try to continue on. I think the one other thing to keep in mind with the connection between puffins and environmental justice is even as we are on this call, things have been moving in the wrong direction. The Supreme Court last week ruled that wetlands, millions of acres of wetlands are no longer federally protected because they are not, in the conservative court's view. For a wetland to be federally protected, basically you have to see it being connected to a lake or river, and not taking into consideration the fact that vast wetlands are visually apart from the lake or river that it feeds, underground.
Right,
and,
exactly.
And that's on top of last year's ruling that's limits the EPA's ability to enact rules to fight climate change. And both of those decisions have major impacts for Black people. The last year's ruling is a no-brainer to understand, because more fossil fuel pollution is disproportionately will hit Black folks. A study. There's been several studies done that show that while white Americans wealthy disproportionately produce fossil pollution through consumption of goods and services, that Black and brown people disproportionately breathe it in because of our proximity to that pollution. And then, of course, the water one, the new ruling will. All you got to do is say Flint, Michigan, and all you got to do is say Superfund sites, and all you got to do is say coal ash dumping in rivers in Black communities in the South. And so the green light that the Supreme Court is giving to polluters with their water ruling last week puts Black communities that were already in peril from water pollution in even more peril.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the. I always feel like it's one of the key sort of disparities that no one really addresses unless it's us speaking about it, because a lot of people will take the sort of the route of, humanity is terrible, humanity is destroying the world, etc. And like, coming from an evolutionary biology perspective, like when you look back at human history and how long we've lived alongside and within nature in general, I mean, yes, you have instances, just like when any species moves into a new area, there's some ecological disturbance there, but eventually there's a balance that's found. So like this new trend of like massive climate and ecological destruction and degradation within the past, century and a half, maybe, It's it's not humanity at whole. That's the problem, and and not to skew a bit politically incorrect, so to speak, but we know who's causing the problem. It's not really us, but we are, like you said, we're bearing the brunt of it, and we're going to be at the forefront of everything that's happening. So I'm glad to see that Joe is able to get back on. And that leads me into the question that I actually had for you both. And Derek already sort of alluded to it in his answer just now, but given these sorts of legislative setbacks that we faced, how do you continue to to help people, both Black communities and also people who are in power, Black and white and other ethnicities, whoever it is, how do you get them to understand sort of the importance of your work to their own interests, so that it doesn't feel like it's just, oh, we're protecting the animal because it's cute,
Yeah, that's honestly, that's the $1 million question, right? I have found that specifically in my advocacy efforts to Black and Brown communities, what really helps is storytelling. There's just something so beautiful about asking Black and Brown people about their experiences in nature, their experience with animals, and or lack thereof, right? Um, usually, usually if they'll find themselves talking about um, the health crisis that has existed in their families for generations. They'll talk about polluted waterways, and so understanding how close home environmental injustices is actually very real and very tangible for Black and Brown communities. That's what I've typically found. Um, However, when I do talk to communities that have a level of affluence or have a level of privilege that they don't necessarily see environmental injustice in their backyard, um, usually what I try to get them to think about is, think about the things that you value the most, right? This could be your
Mm-hmm.
family, this could be your children, it could be your health or your possessions. And then I tell them to just imagine all the ways that environmental injustice strips them from those things.
Mm-hmm.
So if they really love their car and their home, environmental injustice is what will lead to flooding
Right.
or, wildfires, right? Like, um, or if what they value is their children and their families, I tell them, think about how close to illness they will be, if you continue to uh, to not stand up against environmental injustice. If what they value is their health and their just their ability to enjoy life, I tell them, listen, like all the ways in which you are being complacent in this conversation will lead to, you know, the degradation of your health. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because it starts with our communities, right? But eventually it seeps into other people's communities. So the
Yeah.
further they try to other the plight of Black and Brown people, it actually just brings environmental degradation a little closer to their backyard. So that's what I usually try to do. Um, like I mentioned, when I'm talking to folks who are indigenous to my community and or have just been there for as long as they can remember.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's when I say things like, our the neighborhood where the forest is, um, or the city rather, they suffer with child asthma hospitalizations at twice the rate as the states.
Mm-hmm.
They already have horrible access to healthy foods. They already experience flooding and loss every single year. They're already close to waste polluting facilities. Um, not just waste incinerators, but also power plants. They're close to their schools even. So talking about environmental justice and envisioning what a just environment can look like is something that they've been dreaming about for a really long time, and they just don't necessarily have the words
Mm-hmm.
um, to advocate for themselves. So yeah, it's sort of helping folks understand what life could be like if we did live in in a system that valued humanity, valued all of the different aspects of our biomes that we interact with every single day. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, Derek, do you have anything to add as a journalist? How do you communicate that? How do you what sort of messaging do you sort of try to angle with?
Well, I I'm listening to Jhoni and just first of all, I admire what you're trying to do at the local level, and I really struggle with whether this nation can pull itself together in time to because of privileges, particularly unearned privileges. Uh, I don't see it yet. I haven't seen. We haven't had enough hurricanes. We haven't had enough tornadoes. We haven't had enough floods to move the political needle. We haven't had enough heat waves already. So I don't. I mean, it's parallel to gun violence.
Right.
I thought honestly that the Las Vegas massacre at a country western concert might have moved the needle. I would have thought that one of the suburban child school massacres might have moved the needle. It hasn't. So I think we're really at an existential crisis of for Americans in particular. Other nations, by the way, particularly nations of color, are moving on climate change. They see it; it's happening. From the Maldives to South Africa to all kinds of places, people are quite aware of what's happening. The global South, as some people call it, is I mean, as you know, at the last COP27, a huge issue on loss and damage, and yet the rich nations, particularly the United States, still refuse to participate in a meaningful sharing of resources to assist those nations which are affected by our pushing the planet to that 1.5 Celsius limit of catastrophic change. So, so what I try to do personally is try to put out facts and with some narrative of what's happening, tell the story of a Crystal Martinez, what they have to live with environmental injustice, and trying to make the connections for privileged people that, okay, you like birds, and if you like birds, then you have to care about what happens to Crystal Martinez.
Right.
And because if you, I think the one thing that I'm trying to do personally is help break down the silos that the traditional conservation community has long lived in. I know groups like Sierra Club and others are trying to inch their way out of those silos. And many of those organizations are still hamstrung by old donors, old line kind of way of thinking about how they raise their money. And in a nation that's going to be majority people of color in about 20 years, what are those old line organizations? Who's going to help them? Who's going to help them save the birds and polar bears as this nation changes in population? And I posit that that's why we have to make these interconnections, because solving climate change solves a whole lot of problems for both humans and animals.
Yeah, I was thinking when you said that, there was a conversation I was listening to about a year ago, actually, and this was a paleontology panel. And one of the few times I've ever seen a majority sort of folks from the global South, as you say, who were speaking on it. And there was a gentleman from South Africa, a South African geologist, and he was again speaking within the paleontological context about significant sites and things like that. But his greater point was that like science in general, and this is how we're basing our understanding of the world on at this point. You need to have more diverse data points, and then more diverse perspectives, because the future. Well, first of all, the future is now, and the future is majority, if you will, people of color. And if you, meaning the organizations who are running all the stuff and have the resources to do all the things, are sort of tuning them out and alienating them in all these various ways, it puts the very foundation of like what science is supposed to be in like serious jeopardy, existential crisis. And yeah, just what you said there, just what he said really resonated with me in that regard, and it just chimes in perfectly with what you were saying. So I guess turning more a bit inwardly, because we've already spoken about sort of how Black communities and sort of minority communities in general, like we understand these problems, we're living with these problems, we've been living with these problems for a while. But for people who might be either disaffected or who aren't seeing the connections, because even with something like Black Birders Week, there's always still that sort of like, there's some Black people who are like, birds, what y'all doing with the birds though? Like, I don't get it. Like, how do you make that connection to them that it's important for them to see this and protect this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the initial conversation hits folks a little cold, especially when they're dealing with housing, or if they're youth and they're dealing with, um, territorial violence, right? So the initial conversation of, hey, look at this cool bird, doesn't always hit. What I have found that is effective, along with storytelling, is actually bringing folks to explore the outdoors. I think it's absolutely insane that when I did work in the South Bronx, and even the work that I do in Bridgeport, whenever I talk to youth, 9 times out of 10, these youth have never gone hiking.
Mm-hmm.
They've never. Their idea of wildlife is the squirrel and the pigeon, or the sparrow, and I think that it's so important. It is so important that we engage folks from a place of joy and healing in nature, specifically Black and Brown folks, because that enjoyment turned into this desire for conservation. It turned into a desire to explore new species. It turned into something bigger than just the thing that white folks do.
Right.
And so the biggest way that I work with folks to really internalize advocacy for green spaces, advocacy for their wilderness, their urban wilderness, is really by reinforcing what does it look like to bring these folks outside. And when they do come outside, something extremely magical happens, right? I worked with a youth, I would say like maybe 4 years ago. It was her very first hike. She had just finished. She she was fighting a juvenile charge. They were trying to try her as an adult. And I remember her coming outside with us for a hike, and she saw her very first hawk, and the absolute smile on her face, I've never seen before. And this is someone who has a history. Her family has a history of being enslaved in the United States, but seeing her engage with land in a way that was not rooted in pain, that was absolutely amazing. So I think when talking to Black folks about Black and brown folks about just the broader outdoors and what it looks like to conserve and preserve our green spaces, it really does begin with coming outside, understanding where they are, right? Um, just being able to acknowledge the pain and the hurt that happened on land or at sea, wherever. And then also just being able to invite them into a place and a space that looks different from what they know. Um, as for how to engage white folks, I'm still working on that. Um, not necessarily the biggest bullet point on my to-do list, but it's definitely something that I'm still working on.
Yeah, Derrick, is there anything you want to add to
Sure.
that?
Yeah, actually, appreciate what that was beautiful. And I about 35 years ago, I was giving a talk at a predominantly Black community college, and in the Q&A, somebody asked me what my hobbies were, and I said, and I have many, and I just for the heck of it, I said bird watching, and you could hear a giggle like grow into like a tidal wave of laughter. And so I asked the brother, I said, well, why is everybody laughing when I said my hobby's bird watching? He said, man, I said, and I knew, but I didn't want to just let him off the hook. I said, tell me, why is the room laughing? He said, I said, yeah. Because, that's a white folks thing. And so then I said, probably one of the more brilliant things I've ever pulled out of that I rarely have pulled out of my hat is I said, you know what? I don't think that Martin Luther King marched. I don't think that Rosa Parks refused a bus seat. And I don't think like the Greensboro folks or other folks were at lunch counters just for the lunch counter, for a schoolroom, for a bus seat.
Right.
I think they were fighting for our right to own this whole country. And for me, owning this whole country means I own the national parks, I own the wildlife preserves, and I own the responsibility to take care, to observe and take care of these creatures around me and appreciate them. And so I think for me, that is a way to communicate that to quote Black audiences that the natural world. By the way, the original hikers in this country, some of the original long distance, long before the Appalachian Trail, there was something called the Underground Railroad, and among other things. And so there's that. And then there's a wonderful question that Julian Nesbitt has put into the chat. Have you seen in real time someone with power's attitudes toward these issues turn around? Like someone who hasn't paid attention and is now more engaged and involved in understanding. And what is interesting is that I have seen, there are situations where I've seen right-wing philanthropists who otherwise politics you might find reprehensible, but they own a lake with a loon on it, so they fund loon research. You'll have another right winger who has a duck pond, and like they're into wetland protection. So again, a part of it is, can we make these connections that get beyond the political noise that gives people courage to join the fight against the fear mongering and disinformation that we're awash in.
Yeah, I definitely. It's so weird because in this country, when you say that, like the fact that the insult tree hugger exists, like it's a pejorative to want to just like have a tree, I don't know. It's just it's baffling to me, but I'm glad you mentioned that. And thank you, Jhoni, also for that story. I didn't realize I mean, I guess I do realize because I've seen it in people, that same sort of reaction when they see the bird, but like, you know, the intergenerationality of how would you put it? I guess the intergenerationality of just like experiencing the landscape and how we've historically sort of engaged with these areas, very much affects how we see them. Uh, you know, even as someone like who intellectually knows, yeah, my family's been here unwillingly for hundreds of years. It never really that intellectually, but it doesn't sink into your head until you're out there. You hear someone directly say it. So it's a little past 11 o'clock, but we were supposed to go for an hour proper, and we have 5 minutes left on this recording. So I want to skip forward. Since if anybody else in the chat has questions, please do throw them in now. But I wanted to go ahead to our last question that I have prepared. So that we're not just ranting and raving. What does an environmentally just future look like to you?
I will try my best to keep it concise. I'm quite an idealist, or rather a defiant hoper. But I envision an environmentally just future, look like one where folks can live, play, work, and rest in nature. And rest is just as important as working and playing. Well, play is rest as well. But I see an environmental just future as one that engages indigenous folks in a meaningful, holistic way, not just as an afterthought, not just as a way to get more grants or whatever. I see environmentally just future as one that really centers exploration, paid opportunities for youth and second chance communities in nature, using nature as a tool to address youth territorial violence, using nature as a way to address food injustice, food apartheid, really, and really just centering the power of folks that already exist and helping them, just not necessarily helping them, but empowering them to see that they deserve more, and using lessons from nature to kind of just propel us further into like just a better society. That's what I see.
I will second that by saying that I think an environmentally just future is one in which we no longer make a distinction between environmentalism and environmental justice. We need a new term that encompasses it all, because as I've said, what will do well to environmental justice for puffins will be environmental justice for Black and brown people, to alleviate the pollution, particularly air pollution, that fossil fuels give us.
These are things I can both vibe with entirely. Folks in the chat are speaking very approvingly of what you all just said as well. So clearly it resonates. And I'm hoping so much that this goes out to a wider audience later on. I know it's a little bit early in the morning for some folks still, but these sorts of conversations, this is really what I was really hoping to get this year. And not that it hasn't happened, in previous years, but it's always good to like have this as the forefront of the discussion. Like we are talking about these things here. And I'm just, again, honored to be able to share this space with you both. And have personal connections with you both as well, doing these amazing things. Derrick, in case I haven't mentioned on this official platform yet, as you know, Derrick is associated with Project Puffin, and he was the person who actually connected me to be able to go out there last summer and do a couple weeks doing volunteering, and it was my first actual field experience, and so I'm very grateful to have had that. And as for Jhoni, Jhoni, I just met you a couple weeks ago. She reached out to us for Black Birders Week, and the one time we've met in person, this was we had just a really nice interaction. And I think it was the first time I've actually met someone in person in my like sort of home area since Blackbirds Week sort of kicked off. And it's just nice to know that there are folks at home doing the work as well. So
I would like to just, if I can just briefly add, for those of you who have either is a budding researcher on this call or knows of a budding Black researcher or from an underrepresented group, I sponsor a scholarship for a research assistant to spend the whole summer on one of the Project Puffin Islands. Project Puffin is actually composed of 7 islands, 3 of them with puffins. Ade got to spend one on one of the Tern Islands last year, and they're fully paid. It's my personal bit to diversify the conservation world. And because Project Puffin, research assistants from Project Puffin, you spend 3 months out there on the islands. Graduates of that internship go on to Alaska, Antarctica, the South Pacific, and all over the world, and into power positions in conservation at the state, federal, and nonprofit level. So hopefully they can help me advertise those so that we can keep. This will be the 3rd year. Had a Black woman from Florida A&M was the first one 2 years ago, and so go HBCUs. And a wonderful Indonesian American fellow from University of West Virginia took the spot last year. So want to keep it going, and through our day we'll get you more information. Those who are interested will get you more information as to how you can get someone in the pipeline.
Yes. And if you want to see, to plug again, but if you want to see what that actually sort of looks like, that field work looks like, we have a series on the Black AF and STEM YouTube channel where I documented my own experiences out there. And it's just a very, very in-depth look and a very fun look, I think, at the sort of things, that researchers do. And, it's not for, you have to be a certain kind of person to really want to live on an island with birds, with thousands of birds for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, let alone a couple of weeks. But it's important work, and I'm appreciative that people like you are out here sponsoring it and getting folks like us, sort of the next generation up and coming, to be able to do it.
If you can have a little poop on your shirt, you'll be good.
Oh, I still have my battle scars. All right, and on that note, we will wrap it up here. Again, thank you both for the conversation. Thank you for those who have tuned into the chat live, and thank you to those who will be watching in the future. It's been a good morning. It's a good way to start the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Yeah, we hope you tune in for the rest of the talks we have today. Check out our social media postings for those. They'll be on Instagram. We have the podcast posts coming up next, I think, at 1 o'clock. So if you want to hear from Tyke James and Tanaja Hamilton of Bring Birds Back, as well as Will Valentine, 3 podcast folks that you might know of, they're going to be talking about sort of how they bring the bird message to the masses. So that's the next one coming up right after this. But for now, enjoy the rest of your morning. Once again, thank you all for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy Blackbirders Week.